Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today to make a presentation to you guys. Thought it was really important. I thought it was very timely with everything that's going on in our industry right now. With the new NAR settlement coming up, I believe, and I was actually talking to Bill Pipes when I was in New York, and he said that, this is the key to our success as buyers agents, etc. And that is we're going to now have to take buyer agency just as seriously as we've taken listing consultations in terms of actual preparation. Meaning, and so what I thought I would do is, since I spend the majority of my life on the list side, I thought I'd parallel what I do on the list side to prepare for a listing consultation. And I think it's relevant. And I think that buyer's agents need to prepare the same way now that they would for a buyer's consultation in order to overwhelm potential buyers with compelling value why they should use us. Once we receive a lead, our goal is to schedule an appointment as quickly as possible. And we all know that, okay? No different than we want to schedule a listing appointment as quick as possible. However, our first conversation now becomes even more important because we need to gain a clear understanding in depth. Why are they buying? What price point? What area? What is motivating them? Why are they motivated? How are they motivated, etc. And the reason that's so critical to understand this up front, more so than ever, is because we're going to have to, once we meet them, bring even more compelling value to them. And the more we know about them up front, the more we can gear our consultation towards helping them. Okay, I can barely see. Okay. This is important as well. On the list side, we've put together a very detailed email that not only tells a little bit about ourselves, it also summarizes how we're going to market properties, and it highlights kind of our, quote, personal real estate resume. My recommendation is, and I know our team is going to be putting something like this together, but you guys want to put together a very detailed email that's going to, number one, confirm the time, the date, location of the meeting, and send out a calendar invite as well. The second part of the email, as it states here, should summarize and highlight on a very high level your value. The last part should just highlight your personal real estate resume. The reason we want to do this is we want people to understand who we are, what our company is, and what we can do to get them excited about meeting us for the next time. Okay. How do I prepare for a buyer consultation? Remember, knowledge and expertise gives you credibility. And I've said this for years and years and years. The more knowledgeable you are about the market, the more you understand the market, the more you understand areas, you understand how to run comps, run stats, etc. It doesn't matter if you're newer in the business. You can still look like an expert, and that expertise and knowledge gives you the credibility that you may not have that somebody who's been in the business a long time has. Continuing on, I would recommend that you guys put together again, this is something that the Gelman team uses currently, but we're going to even expand it more. I'd recommend you guys putting together a buyer consultation book with your value proposition. What's going to be in that book? It's going to talk about your team, whether you're a team or an individual. If you're an individual that's out there listening, I recommend you still put together a chart of support staff. Mark and I used to do this years and years ago when it was just the two of us and one admin. we would utilize the staff people on our broker who supported us, and we put them in our chart because technically they are our support staff. If you're part of a team, it's great to put on there, who are your listing coordinators, your marketing coordinators, your closing coordinator, etc. And not only list them, but put a picture of them also. People like to put faces together as they're speaking to people. Number two, you want to explain the home buying process via a flow chart. And as we talked about in our own huddle this morning, I believe it's important to seriously overwhelm them with the process, meaning put as many steps as you possibly can within that process so that they feel that they cannot navigate this without you. Also, there's a lot of resources out there that you can get a lot of this information. So one of the things that I listed was that you can go to NAR. NAR has a tremendous amount of things out there right now. They have one that's 105 more ways buyers provide value. Okay. I'm not telling you to use all those, but pick out the ones that are important, add them to your existing presentation. And by the way, for those people who spend most of their time listing, there's one out there that's 179 value added for a listing agent. So NAR has a lot of resources out there that I think will become important. Number two, there's a website called Housing Wire. Housing Wire also has a tremendous amount of information. I read an article on housing value, and it just basically had 5 major things that a buyer agent can bring value to their people. Okay. In addition, we can also fall back, and if you could play around with ChatGPT or OpenAI, you can put in there, what compelling value can a buyer's agent bring to a buyer, and you can say, give me 10 points, give me a paragraph. You can do whatever you want, but take advantage of the resources, because again, you don't want to go into buyer consultations like we have in the past where we're not bringing the most compelling value. Even your friends and family today, if they know there is a possibility that they may have to pay a commission towards a house, they want to make sure they're working with the best. Also in the buyer consultation book, you should add some bullet points, but don't expand. Just add them as teasers. And the reason I say add them as teasers, because we all know that things are going to change. They're going to be people are going to be interviewing more and more agents, and you don't want to give away your secrets. You want to just throw out, for example, uncovering off-market properties, how I do it or how our team does it. We talked about unlisted opportunities today in our own huddle. You want to mention negotiating tactics I use or our team uses to win. You also, one of the things that we don't really think about that we do that's super important is we help mitigate risk. A good buyer's agent is going to help somebody from mitigating risk, meaning making a major mistake in a purchase of a home. And a good buyer's agent is going to make sure they thoroughly understand what the buyer's looking for, which can also prevent buyer's remorse throughout that process. And I always use the example, I can go out today and I can buy a new car. And if I don't like that car, I can sell it and I might lose $10,000 or $15,000. In this market where you're overpaying for properties, if you make a mistake and have buyer's remorse and want to resell, you could lose tens of thousands, even 100,000 or more dollars. So you want to make sure that you help them prevent any buyer's remorse. And then you guys, again, there's so many resources out there that you can add to this, but these are just to give you some ideas on a very, very high level. Okay. So a couple of things that I think are really important, and these are what I'm calling tips before you meet with a buyer. Okay, one, if you're a newer agent or even a seasoned agent, but you're lacking a little bit of confidence, which a lot of people, anytime that there's a major disruptor or things change, people get nervous. And when they get nervous, they tend to lack confidence. So leverage off team members or other members in your brokerage if you're an individual. Don't be afraid to ask another agent to go on a presentation with you, to support you, and to add value to the presentation. In addition, if you know the buyer is also considering selling, then bring a listing specialist with you and tag team the presentation. By tag teaming the presentation, you can clearly win both sides of the business. And I'm gonna at the end, when I have my close, I'll give you a perfect example of what I did, and it worked amazing. So just don't be afraid to utilize other people. It does not reflect poorly on you at all. And I would say the other thing, as long as I'm saying that, as we go on in the presentation and we talk about putting together stats, putting together all sorts of stuff that you're going to bring to the buyer consultation, it is not critical that you memorize those. Okay. People don't expect you to memorize them. You want to have them with you. And I'll give you an example of how that worked yesterday in one of my presentations. Number two. Oh, no, I missed one. Okay. I believe this is another tip that I believe is very important. And it's basically saying you have to be flexible when you're presenting. Okay. You should always be flexible. And what do I mean by that? When you're presenting, most presentations or consultations do not go as scripted. Okay. And what I mean by that is, and we've all been there, is you'll be in the middle and you think you're on a roll, and then all of a sudden a buyer or a seller asks you a question. And you're like, in your mind, I'm going to get to that. The seasoned agent, who is the advisor / consultant, will stop and answer all questions. The less seasoned agent or the salesperson will say, I'll get back to you later on that. I'm going to cover that later. At that point, you're ignoring the buyer or the sellers, what they're asking. They may lose interest. The other thing that's important is you can then, a seasoned agent should be able to they have their presentation down so well that they should be able to get back on track and continue their presentation where they left off. But more importantly, I believe, is that based on the questions they ask, it can also help you gear the rest of your presentation. Because if they're asking you a question, they're interrupting your presentation, they're in a sense telling you what is important to them, right? So then kind of what hits them, what doesn't. You still want to cover everything, but you want to make sure that you cover the things that they're asking for even in more detail, because those are the things that are important to them. Okay. The actual presentation. So the first thing I want to, at the top, point out that's super important. Again, remember that you are, and we are, trusted real estate advisors or consultants, not salespeople. There's a great little book. A lot of the seasoned agents have read this before. It literally will take you an hour, maybe 2 hours to read it at the most. It's Jeffrey Gitomer, who, for those of you in St. Louis and old timers, He used to write a business column in the St. Louis Business Journal, and it was all every week. It would be basically on sales tactics, and he became a world-renowned speaker. And some of you all who are online right now that are part of part of Rate might have remember meeting him 10 years ago in Dallas. But anyway, he wrote a very popular and famous book called Little Red Book of Selling. And one of the best quotes in there is he says, people love to buy or like to buy, but they don't like to be sold. Okay. And you need to remember that. People want to buy, but they don't want to be sold. So the next three steps are what I'm looking at when I am sitting down with somebody for the first time. Okay. Number one, you want to give them an overview of the market. You want to discuss inventory, prices, rates, etc. This is where your research and your time and effort that you put in is critical. Okay. We talked about this in the meeting this morning. You want to dig extremely deep into their understanding of what is motivating them to move, why they're moving, what they're looking for in their new house, and or what they're looking for in their agent. Okay. And again, you've got a consultant advisor hat on versus a salesperson. The salesperson wants to get in there right away and they want to sell their proposition. Educate them, ask questions, and then once you understand what they're looking for, what their goals and expectations are, we can now talk about how we can help them achieve their goals by articulating our value proposition. Okay. Okay. So after you know, and there's a slide that an important slide that I think when we switched, we missed. I'm going to go back really quick because, and I'm sorry about this. Let me find this. I'm not sure where it went. Hold on, guys.
You may just have to summarize it.
Okay, I'll just what I'm going to throw in is that what is super important, and again, when you're preparing for your buyer consultation, not only do you need to make sure that you educate the heck out of yourself so that you can then transfer that to the individuals, it's extremely important. So when I go on a listing presentation, okay, I'll spend an hour going through comps, running stats. In RMLS, for those of you who are in St. Louis, there at the top, at the menu on the top, there's a stats section. You can go in there and you can customize the stats any way you want. I always run stats based on active number of properties, months of inventory, and medium sale price. Okay. And I print them out and I bring them with me. And and that is part of your educating the buyer before you even talk. And by the way, you run those comps, and stats based on the area and price points you're looking at. But you expand if somebody's looking, for example, like last night, I had a meeting for a $950,000 house, but when I ran 900,000 to 1.1 million, there was not one active property. Okay. So I expanded it to 800,000 to 1.2 million. I found one active property. Okay. But when you show up with that and you can explain that to them, not only do you make them feel good, but you also, they now understand what we're talking about with regard to, there we go. Thank you. Not sure. Yeah. Okay. So, and as the slide shows you, you want to dig deep. And again, when you're meeting with your people, most people think they know everything, right? And what they know is what they hear on the news and what they read in the news. And this is where we bring the value proposition to them by showing them that we understand that as well. And by the way, part of this is you better understand it, because if they do know more than you have no chance, right? And so this allows you to, again, expert equals credibility. Expertise equals credibility. For those of you that are newer in the business, if you understand the stats, you understand the market, you understand where interest rates are, etc., it's going to give you significant credibility. Okay. So let me jump back because I want to leave time for questions. Okay. So we've gone through the presentation. We've educated them. We understand exactly what they're looking for. And we've talked about our proposition value. And again, we could spend all day, which is why I just wanted to give you guys a high level overview of how to approach this and what to think about. Now you know what you want to prepare when you meet. Okay. So after the consultation's over, I always ask, and this is again, buy side, list side, the same. Is there any questions, Dina, that I haven't answered or that you have for me? Well, no, I'm not going to, I'm not going to get in that right now. I'm just talking after you've gone into, you want to just ask them, to make sure that you've covered everything they're looking for. Okay. We'll do one on commission later, but this is more just kind of how we work the whole presentation. Then I ask them if there's anything, and there's different ways to state this, if there's anything they heard today that would prevent them from doing business with me. Okay. And if they say anything, they're either going to say no, or they're going to say, tell me a little bit more about something. They're going to be specific. And then again, because you have prepared and you have the stats, you're ready to roll. Okay. Last night, as an example, in my presentation, I said, is there anything else that I can tell you? And they said, we're just curious, what was the market like prior to COVID? Okay. I was able to flip to my page, my stats page, which I always run 5 years, by the way. I was able to go to my stats page, and in May and April of last year, in 2019, there was 10 active properties versus 1 or 0 now. Again, they don't expect me to have this memorized, but the fact that I came in prepared made me, and then it started a whole nother conversation. And again, all these things help us. And, just like your presentation, when I said you have to be flexible, it's no different than when you're honest, when you're doing, you can use an LP Mama script, or you can use a script with a buyer. It very rarely goes. The whole idea is to make it conversational and make them appreciate and understand that you get what you're talking about. One of the little key words, like when you're talking to somebody, even when you answer the phone and somebody calls you on a property, anytime I role play with somebody, agents will say, that I think that, you know, they'll say, while I'm looking that up, I think that property's in Chesterfield. You never say, I think. You always say, while I'm looking up, that property is located in Chesterfield. Again, it's all these little things that they're going to pick up now as they interview buyer's agents more than they've ever interviewed buyer's agents before. Okay. The third thing I do is I say, you know, if they, you try to close them and they say, oh, we're still interviewing agents. Okay. So there's a couple things that I wanted to mention when it comes to, um, with regard to that. Number one, I made a note that when you meet somebody for your buyer presentation and you start to and you ask them, we'd say dig deep and ask questions, right? My recommendation to you guys is to put together a standard list of questions that you would use, no different than if I was interviewing Dina for a job. Dina would probably come there prepared with questions for a future employer, right? If you put together a good list, you'll make sure that you get all your questions answered, because when you're in the presentation mode, it's easy to forget things and say, oh man, I wish I would have asked that question. So if you, and you can, by the way, it can be something that you put together and just print out and bring with you. And that, and it's, and you can just kind of, and if they see it, you can say, I just want to make sure I put together these questions that I feel are really important to help me gain the best understanding of what of how to help you. And the reason I write this down and bring this with me is so I don't forget anything. Okay. So, and again, no different than if when you're interviewing. Okay. So one of the things that we were talking about in our meeting today, and then I'm going to close this, is that we're going to have to become more gritty and more aggressive in this market. Okay. Buyers agents have never, for the most part, been interviewed like they've been interviewed. And again, even when Mark and I first got in the business, we had a lot of friends and family. We knew a lot of people. They knew we were successful business people before we got in the business, but they didn't list with us because they wanted to make sure that we were the best match for them, and we had to earn their business. Okay. Buyers agents today are going to have to earn their business more than they've ever. Okay. And so we're going to have to be aggressive. I'm going to tell you a real quick story. And this was a tag team listing meeting that I had with one of our buyers agents last week. Let me preface this by saying that I've known the people that called me to interview to list their home for 50 years. Okay. Yeah, I'm old. I'm 60. But I've known them my whole life. The buyer's agent that I brought with them is Julie, who's been in the business. She's one of our longest agents, been in the business over 10 years. After the presentation, I thought, you know, and by the way, never assume that you're getting the business, ever. Okay. We said, what's the next step? Let's get things rolling. And then it was all of a sudden out of nowhere, we're not ready yet. We got to talk about it. And come to find out, the wife, her best friend, is a real estate agent. Okay. So what did I do? I said, Pam, can you share what her name is? She threw out her name. And you never want to, by the way, ever say anything negative about about any one of your competition. Okay. She throws out the name. I've never heard of the person. And I said, Pam, I said, I understand she's your friend, but I said, I've been in the business 20 years. I've done thousands of transactions, and I've never heard of her. So the next thing that I said to her, I said, are you familiar? Because I didn't know their buying time frame. I said, what do you know about the, or what have you read about the new NAR settlement that's coming about? Says I've heard about a little bit about it. I said, let me just explain to you on a very high level. Once the new settlement takes place in July, listing agents are no longer going to have sellers, or sellers have the, sellers will continue to have a choice, but there is no buyer's agency commission guaranteed anymore. And what do I mean by that? Some sellers are going to offer a concession that'll be similar to an old buyer's agent commission, and your friend or Julie is going to get paid their full commission. It's not going to cost you anything. I said, number two, you go to a house, number two house you go to only pays, the seller's only willing to pay 1%. Now, most good buyers agents, including us, we're going to require a minimum of 2.5 to 3%, which means that you are now going to have to participate paying Julie or your friend 2 to 1.5 to 2%. The third option, the third house you look at, you fall in love with, and there's no commission at all. And now you're looking at $1 million houses, and you have to pay your buyer's agent $25,000 to $30,000. And I closed them. And I said, let me ask you a question, Pam. If you have to pay your own way, and you have to pay 25 to 30,000, you're going to pay it to your friend, or you're going to pay it to my agent, or Julie, who's one of our experienced agents with 10 years? Who's going to protect you the most? Who knows the best process, etc.? Make a long story short, we closed the deal. They actually bought a property the next day. Okay. So yeah, but my point is, if I don't throw that out, and I don't give them that, I don't tell them or ask that question, what would you do if you had to pay 25 to 30,000? Would you rather pay it to your friend who I've never heard of, who's new, does part-time, or an experienced agent who has your back? Okay. On my side, and this is the last thing that I'll say with regard to, and we brought this up a little bit today in our huddle. When you're talking to them, whether it's the first time or you're meeting them for the first time, or whether you're in their house for the first time, try to find something that you have in common. Whether you see a picture on the wall of a college degree, for example, and you go, oh, I graduated from there too. I have a child that's going there. They have a picture of Italy, and you're like, we love to travel. We were just there. And it becomes, you have a little bit of a commonality. So I knew unfortunately, for those of you who know me, I've had multiple surgeries, knees replaced, back surgery, shoulder, etc. So I'm the bionic man. But the individual that I was meeting with, the husband of this story, he had major back surgery. And we both had the same back surgeon, who's known to be the best back surgeon in St. Louis. So I said to him, and I said to them on the list side, I said, if your friend just graduated medical school, would you allow them to operate on your back? Or do you want an expert like myself who's been in the business 20 years? So that's the kind of gritty that we're going to have to get. And by the way, it doesn't come across like snotty, arrogant, anything. It's the fact. Okay. Last thing that I want to say, and I made a note of this morning, is it is critical when you guys, whether you're going on a listing appointment or a buyer consultation, to dress professional. Okay. And what that means is if you're meeting with somebody, and by the way, even if it's your best friend, even if it's somebody in your family, and even if it's a Saturday morning or a Sunday when everybody's casual, what men should wear a tie, women should wear business casual, business attire. And I'm throwing this out, not a sexist thing at all, but do not wear low cut tops. Okay. And the reason I'm saying that, we were taught that early on by one of our coaches, because you need to understand that in most cases you're meeting with a husband and wife. You don't want somebody, number one, to take you wrong or to put you in a jealous situation. And so dress business business attire, look professional, regardless of who you're meeting, what time of the day, friend or family. Last thing is, everybody in the room probably has an Apple Watch on. And my buddy Mike and I have talked about this. Do not wear your Apple Watch to any consultation, any appointments, because what happens? You're sitting there, you're like this. I've never had an Apple Watch. I love watches. I have all these cool watches. Got an Apple Watch a couple years ago. Wore it one meeting, and that was the only meeting I ever wore it to, because I started getting texts in the middle of presentation. And fortunately I got the listing, but I looked down. Naturally, you go like this. And they said, are you in a hurry? Do you have to go? So they thought you were looking at your watch. So do not wear an Apple Watch or any smartwatch to any presentation, because it can be distracting and it can be taken the wrong way. Okay. And that is all I got. So let's if we have question and answers, be more than glad to. I went through quick, but tried to give you guys what I believe is what I do on a listing presentation. It's totally transferable here. And I think if you follow the same type of guideline, that we're all going to be successful. And keep in mind that when Mark and I started in 2008, we looked at it as an opportunity. This disruptor in July is going to give us the biggest opportunity that we've ever had. And there's going to be a mass exodus of agents who don't get it. Okay.
So my question was, when you encounter maybe a misunderstanding or some kind of whether it's an objection or whatever it is, how do you clarify that without being adversarial? Like whether it's,
so give me an example.
It could be like, oh yeah, I've heard of the NAR lawsuit. I don't ever have to buy a buyer's agent anymore, and that's just it.
So wait, say that. Wait.
Like I've heard of the NAR lawsuit. It just means I don't have to pay a buyer's agent, and I've heard all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so number one, I think there's like everything, there's a ton of misinformation.
Yeah.
Okay. And the way you need to turn it is this. Okay. If you are working with a new buyer, okay, and I actually did this with a good friend of mine whose daughter lives out of town. They were working with an agent. They met at an open house who provided absolutely no value and was only sending them listings that came up. So what I did to Madison, I said, Madison, is your agent calling expireds, trying to find new properties? Are they calling canceled? Are they doing call arounds in neighborhoods? Are they door knocking? Does their team have unlisted opportunities can be bought off market? What you want to do. So the way I would answer the objection is turning around and asking them questions, in the sense that if you've met with other agents or talking to other agents, are they going to be doing all those things? Because you want them, again, I believe that that the value proposition, taking everything to the next level, is going to force people to think about things more. And the more we can overwhelm them and ask them, like I asked Madison, is your agent doing all these things? She said, they're not doing anything. And I referred her to an agent.
So it wasn't like an adversarial thing. like sometimes I'll get myself in a situation where they've told me something nutty and I'm like, ooh, I want to correct that misunderstanding, but I'm like, how do I do that?
So one of the things that what I always say, if I totally disagree with something, I say, I appreciate your comment and thought. I respectfully disagree.
And
You know,
why?
and then I go into it, you know, and the most successful, and I think of like radio personalities, okay? There's certain radio personalities, they don't care what they say, they don't care what their clientele says. Most people want an intelligent conversation, okay? Whether it's in politics or religion, okay? You don't want somebody throwing the religion or politics in your face, but I'm always open to listen to why they support this or support that, as long as they're not pushing it on me. So don't get defensive, and respectfully disagree, and then tell them why. Any others? Can I see something in chat? Okay. So anything else that I can answer?
Right. Can you just talk about like, I don't know, just because you're here, I want to ask you a million questions. Just repeat it after.
Okay.
Yes, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
So other than this, like what would you really be hyper focusing on if you had to be a buyer's agent today? You know, what would you really?
So the question is what would you hyper focus on as a buyer's agent today? In addition to the NAR settlement, understanding that. So again, as I said it throughout the entire presentation, knowledge is credibility. If you look at the most successful agents, even that are doing the most amount of business on our team, any team, it's because they can talk to anybody about any area, and provide value. So let me say this as well. So one of the mistakes that I see people and that are new in the business do is they're afraid to meet with anybody until they think they know everything, right? As I stated earlier, most agents, even newer, know more than the person they're going to meet with. However, where we can fall short is not understanding all the properties that are out there. Okay, we understand our business and we understand how to mitigate the risk. We understand how, once you buy a house, the inspection process and all these things. But at the end of the day, buyers have the same access, for the most part, to properties. And the last thing you want them to do is call you and say, why didn't you tell me about this house? So what I recommend is, number one, really follow, and Mark talks about this in detail, follow properties. If you're focusing on a specific area, you have a specific buyer, you better make sure that you know everything that's on the market that could be a possibility for them, so that you can tell them about it. Okay. Use a shopping cart. But the other thing that I'll do, even on a seller, if I'm about to list a house in a neighborhood, or I have a house listed in a bigger neighborhood, I'll let them know when a house just came on the market. It's now potential competition. Okay. The other thing is that you should spend, when I got in the business, I spent probably an hour to an hour and a half a day previewing properties. And when I say it doesn't even have to be previewing, it could be previewing an area. Okay. Because in today's world, with very limited inventory, it is critical to be a chameleon. Okay. It's critical. And what I mean by that is that, years ago, when I started 20 years ago, there might have been, 30 properties in one area that somebody was looking at. And by the way, the difference back then also was that if you said you wanted to be in a specific area and price point, you waited until you bought in that area and price point. Today, in the last 4 or 5 years, with the weakness of inventory, is that people are being forced to go outside of the area they started, outside of the type of house they started, outside of the price point they started. So at the end of the day, you need to, you don't have to be an expert in every area, but you have to have a high level expertise in all areas. Meaning that, I live in Clayton, but I know where things are in South County. I know where things are in North County. I don't know detail, but I know enough. You guys have had conversations with me. I know enough to have a conversation where anybody that I'm talking to, because I have credibility, knows I, at least on a high level, understand what I'm talking about. So that, to me, is one of the most important things you can do.
Hey, Dennis, do you want to type your question in the chat? 'Cause I don't think we don't see, it might be easier. I see your hand raised, but you might want to type your question in the chat just to make it easier.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, just maybe suggest to agents that don't have your background in 16 years or whatever. I mean, I think you've told us before just to rely, kind of lean on the development team. Like, I know y'all kind of drop you guys, especially if we call, like, hey, Mark asked me to call, but like, how do we make our stuff?
So no, that's a good question. So number one, the way I said that's a good question, that's super important to use that line. Okay. When I first started out in the business, and this could be something you guys could even do yourself. Okay. When you go to contract training, or when there's a lot of forms that are overwhelming, right? Print them out, highlight every box, and make a little note so that when you go to fill out your online forms, that you don't forget something. Okay. And when people ask questions about the contract or about this or that, and you don't know the answer, even though you know you should, say, that's a great question. Let me do a little research, because if they're asking you a contract question, you can say the contract changes so often that I just want to double check to make sure that I give you the right answer. Okay. If somebody asks you a question about a house and you don't have access to it right now, let me, as soon as I get back to my office, I want to look it up. I know the house, I've been through it, but I don't remember exactly the square footage and how many bedrooms it has, or the configuration. I don't want to give you the wrong answer. And then the last part of it is you can rely on the higher authority always, meaning that you could say, I can't, I'm going to have to ask my admin team. I'm going to have to ask my team leader about that. I'm going to have to ask my sales manager about that. I'm not exactly sure, and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. So anytime you don't know something, that's a great question. I'll get back to you. I'll find it out and I'll get back to you. Don't tell them you get back to them in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because you might not be able to get the hold of the person you need to. Tell them if it's in the morning, tell them I'll get back to you, by the end of the business day. If it's something you can get quick, you'll get back to them in a couple hours. If it's something that might take some time, I'll get back to you by the end of the day.
So
Yep.
just say a lot of my clients have had that same experience, or with the last closing that I had, or even if it's a team closing, even if you've never sold anything in your life yet, you can
Everybody, yeah. Right. And by the way, for everybody that's listening, whether you're an individual or a team leader, everybody's going to put together a buyer book consultation, a buyer book. Okay. Just make sure that's as in depth as possible, because again, there's in the environment we're going into, too much is not too much. Okay. You want to overwhelm them, because you want them to say, wow, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. That's that's when they need you. Okay, so is there,
Yeah, I'm gonna just see, hold on. Dennis, I'm gonna allow you to talk if you have a question that you wanna, it's like we're,
hello, Dennis.
I'm gonna ask, okay, I'm asking to unmute, and then also, I know, what's it? Let's see. Oh, he's still muted. He may not have a question, but Devora, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Also raised your hand, so I allowed you to speak and unmuted you just in case you have a question as well. I'll give you guys a few minutes to see if you do. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
Anybody have any questions online?
Yeah.
Yes,
But thank you so
I have a question. This is Deborah.
Hi, Deborah,
Awesome.
how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for doing this today. This was so helpful. But
Good,
my question
good.
was, I heard that if you're in a listing consultation and you're pulling up the active properties to also look at what other sellers are paying out, and just to let that
Hold
seller
on, you just,
know. Oh, can you hear me?
okay, say that one more time. You're pulling up actual properties?
Yeah. Pulling up actual active properties that
Yes.
is showing that those sellers are paying out some type of commission, to where you ask that seller, you may not want to not offer any commission because these other sellers are offering it. Like, how do you
Okay,
feel about that?
okay, so right now, that's applicable, okay? Meaning that, and I'll give you a little case study that when this first was announced, we did a search to see if anybody that was listing was going to offer 0% commission. We
Mhm.
found one, I'm not going to tell the street or the area, but it's in Lindbergh School District, okay? And was a good price point that would traditionally sell very quickly on a really good street. They stayed at 0 commission for 1 week
Mm.
because they realized that nobody was looking at their house, or that they were, to me, any seller who decides that they're going to offer 0 commission before it even starts is probably somebody that's going to be a little bit challenging to work with.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know what, we were talking about this in our meeting today, is that, we're, the dialogue is basically, when you're interviewing for a listing going forward in the future, and somebody asks you what your fees are, you're not going to say 6% like you used to.
Right.
You're going to determine what you want your side to be. So let's just say I'm interviewing for $1 million listing, and they say, what are your fees? I would say my fee is 3 to 3.5%. You need to determine what type of concession you want to offer to the buyer. And when you
Mm.
do it that way, then it makes them think. And by the way, I've had a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations. I haven't had one person, even if it was July, say that they wouldn't offer a commission or a concession.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's going to be plenty of them that are not going to, though,
Mhm.
and it's going to be more challenging. But so if you're in a listing presentation, you're just going to say, my commission is X. You have to determine what you want to offer to the buy side.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Even talking about
Yes.
the dress code part too. That was helpful. So
You,
I like you
you,
put a little bit more into this whole presentation. I appreciate you. Thank
you
you.
are welcome. You are welcome. Let me see. Looks like there's a couple chats. Okay. So that is an interesting question. So they would have to be, and I cannot answer this question because I don't know what the rules are going to be on this. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to have multiple overlapping buyer agencies. I think what is going to happen is you're going to have a lot of one-time buyer agencies per showing per house, versus, again, when you list a house, you can only sign a listing agreement with one person. So I'm not sure you can have overlapping buyer agreements, but I cannot answer that. So I'm sorry I couldn't go into more detail on that, but nobody knows how that's going to be handled. Okay, guys, thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. Hopefully this was helpful, and feel free anytime to reach out to me.